Welcome, everybody. We are on chapter 10 of our corporate coup regarding Venezuela. You remember a while back in a previous chapter, we talked about Ricardo Hausmann. You spell his name Hausmann. He was an economist that wrote prolific information that supported the Washington's position of whatever they wanted to do in Venezuela. And we'll get to him. But Anya opens up this chapter with his daughter, Joanna Hausmann. She was a New York City based nightclub manager. Nightclub comedian. She is best known for her work supporting Washington's coup against her family's homeland, Venezuela. In the weeks immediately following the U.S. recognition of Juan Guaido, Hausmann emerged as one of the most prominent pro-coup Venezuelan voices, and I put that in air quotes because she's lived in New York City forever, on the internet. All right, there we go. Let's get Bridget up here and we'll get SR. So you have this comedian who supposedly has, other than her family's from Venezuela, no real connection to Venezuela at all. But she's all over Twitter at the time, talking up the impending regime change in Venezuela, seemingly disconnected from the whole thing, as if she's not in direct relation to the coup machine itself. She was packaging all of the information John Bolton and Elliot Abrams was talking about in jokes in her routine and one-liners on Twitter. Her first video on the subject, posted on her personal YouTube and Facebook pages within a week of Guaido's swearing-in ceremony, and that's in air quotes too, racked up nearly 4 million views, with a promise of explaining exactly what was happening inside of Venezuela by providing, in her words, quote, just the facts. Recorded in what appeared to be the living room of her apartment, the video opened with Hausmann's vow to dispel all information on the internet and simply state the facts. Quote, I did a bunch of research to explain in the clearest way possible what is going on in a way I hope people can understand, unquote. She did a lot of research. Hausmann proceeded to rattle off a litany of Venezuelan opposition talking points as if she'd been handed the script from USAID. Maduro was an illegitimate dictator who single-handedly squashed the opposition-controlled legislature, rounded up peaceful demonstrators, and ran the country's economy into the ground. That was just the facts. Her account completely failed to offer any explanation of the National Assembly's legal status or chronicle the brutal riots instigated by USAID and the quote-unquote peaceful opposition. As Hausmann also completely erased the role of U.S. sanctions in the Venezuelan economy, driving up inflation, harming the medical infrastructure, and limiting the amount of food available. Following her arguments, Hausmann launched a wholehearted defense of Guaido, informing viewers that he did not just declare himself president, he was not right-wing, and somehow, despite never having ran for president, he was the quote-unquote elected president of Venezuela. Near the end of her scripted rant, Hausmann starts crying as they're all taught to do. Quote, on a personal level, my father is exiled from going back home. This is about people wanting their country back. That's it, unquote. Based on her performance, viewers may have been left with the impression that her father was an impoverished migrant forced to make the hellish trek from Venezuela across the US Mexican border in search of political asylum. While that was far from the case, her commentary was an unintentional confession. Indeed, if any Venezuelan could be accused of wanting their country back, it was Johanna Hausmann's father, Ricardo. Ricardo Hausmann was no ordinary Venezuelan. He was not only a high ranking Venezuelan official prior to Chavez's presidency, but established himself as an influential academic at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government after moving to the US in the 1990s. He literally had nothing to do with Maduro and had not lived in Venezuela since the Maduro presidency. By March of 2019, Hausmann had also taken over as Guaido's top economic advisor to the fake president and was a representative before the Inter-American Development Bank, which is like the IMF for Central America. Multiple sources who have worked with Hausmann over the years, including several with knowledge of his conduct during meetings with US government officials, has described him as unpleasant, vindictive, and driven by ideological blindness. One of his former colleagues said Hausmann professed that he did not know anyone whose children went to public school, where Hausmann's drivers and nannies, not people in his eyes, asked the ex-colleague. Hausmann said he had 15 seconds when U.S. Venezuela policy was hijacked by the far right. A separate acquaintance remarked to Anya, saying that he blew even that. That same source, who worked in the U.S. financial sector, described Hausmann as an academic with delusions of grandeur. Anya became a target of Hausmann's behavior when she questioned him regarding his political conflict of interest. In fact, Hausmann's late night tantrums against Anya eventually cost him his job in the Guaido coup administration. In March of 2019, Guaido selected Hausmann to serve as his representative to the Development Bank, a regional financial institution focused on promoting neoliberal development in Latin America and the Caribbean. He appears as a grandfather figure within the Venezuelan opposition. Hausmann, addition to the fake government, provided it an air of authority. You know, he works at Harvard. Unlike diplomatic appointees like Vecchio Tari, Hausmann was not a minor league operative vying for influence, nor was he associated with the extreme wing of Venezuelan politics. Instead, he was regarded as a leading neoliberal thought leader of his time. Hausmann was a prominent Harvard professor with a knack for boiling seemingly complex economic concepts down to tidbits for popular audience digestion. Kind of a prepackaged policy wonk for which TED Talks were created. In 2006, he founded a thing called the Growth Lab at Harvard University. It was a policy research center that, according to its website, works in the pursuit of inclusive prosperity and a quality of life for everyone that we know is achievable. Also, the website goes on, a country is, in this metaphor, a collection of monkeys that are living off some trees. Hausmann offered up this degrading view of sovereign nations and their populations in a 2019 video promotion for the Growth Lab. You know, those countries that have people that are like monkeys. This secured Haussmann a place at a leading university as and touted as a free market scholar. You know, free market as in inclusivity like DEI. Throughout the years leading up to his Guaido appointment, Haussmann was ferried around the world to share his thoughts on global development, often with analytical points and rhetoric. And he would end his sentences with, right? Like he's giving you some profound information. Haussmann delivered one of his performances in November 2018 when he appeared to reveal prior knowledge of the impending regime change operation that would target Venezuela 2 months later. Quote, "The international community is now focused on the idea that January 10th is the end of the presidential period of Nicolas Maduro." Haussmann mentioned Guaido's self-declared rule during a talk before the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, a foreign policy gathering funded by none other than the petroleum industry. During the meeting, Haussmann detailed his vision for the morning after the regime change in Caracas, informing the crowd that based on his conversations with Venezuelan opposition, which of course would include Elliot Abrams and John Bolton, he was confident that a coup would result in the opening up of the oil industry. Quote, "We need to change the oil law so that we can allow private investment in the oil industry," unquote. Haussmann's morning after prescription for Venezuela presented a return to the country's neoliberal period when its government called in the military to repress massive bread riots in the capital, disappeared and tortured protest leaders, and dug mass graves after they were killed. For Haussmann, that era also happened to coincide with the height of his career as a Venezuelan government official. So he was in the government while all of the chaos was happening to the people that he refers to as monkeys. Before joining Harvard in 2000, Haussmann served as a top economic advisor to Venezuelan President Carlos Andrés Pérez. Though he had been elected on an anti-austerity platform, Pérez accepted an IMF loan, that's mistake number one, and implemented a series of reforms attached to it immediately upon taking office in 1989. Known as the Great Turn, because these all bring austerity to these countries. But they put the money in their own pockets. The reforms prioritized state utilities and abolished price controls for basic supplies, policies that unsurprisingly created despair and hunger among the Venezuelan working class. As neoliberal Venezuelan economist Juan Cristobal Nagel put it, the Great Turn represented your base Washington consensus recipe. Venezuelans' underclass erupted in February 1989 when the IMF reforms triggered a 30% hike in bus fares. Pérez ultimately unleashed the boot of the military to crush the week-long protest, resulting in the death of up to 3,000 people. Many were dumped in unmarked mass graves just outside of Caracas, their bodies marked with signs of death by execution. Though Haussmann was working as a visiting fellow at Oxford, in the UK at the time, he had been instrumental in crafting the economic policies that were eventually adopted and mandated by the IMF. Haussmann will tell you that he was abroad at Oxford during this rebellion. His book that he has written, We Created Chavez, A People's History of the Venezuelan Revolution, charted Chavez's rise as a product of the IMF prescribed neoliberal economic program that ravaged Venezuelans' working class. One author said, while this may be true, Hosman has already spent years in a number of government positions going back to the mid 80s. And as a key participant, spreading neoliberal doctrine from his professorship at an economic institute inside of Venezuela. That institute was referred to as IESA Boys. It referred to a group of Venezuelan economists who taught and studied at a private institute within Venezuela. It's actually in Caracas throughout the 70s and 80s. It was set up to mirror the Chicago Boys that was implemented, economic policies from the Chicago Boys that was implemented after the coup in Chile. That destroyed its economy under the CIA-installed Pinochet government there. The IESA Boys were synonymous with the kind of pro-capital austere policies that Perez implemented in the lead up to the riots. In his book, Windfall to Curse, Oil and Industrialization of Venezuela, economist Jonathan Dijon wrote that Perez was greatly influenced by these economic academics, including Hosman, characterizing them as an elite group who supposedly was nonpartisan that championed neoliberal reform. According to Dijon, this group initiated rapid liberalization reforms under Perez, opening Venezuela up for pillaging of multinational corporations while gutting what remained of its social programs. Many of Hosman's disciples served in the Perez administration, which he later rejoined in 1992. He took over the Minister of Planning, meaning economic planning. Within years, the widespread social and economic destruction that Hosman and his fellow IESA boys delivered had set the stage for the Chavez Revolution and the 1998 electoral victory. Chavez's election was an indirect response to neoliberalism, born of a mass resistance in the streets. In power, it remained largely faithful to its mission. By the time of Chavez's 1998 election victory, Hosman had been living outside of Venezuela for several years. In 1994, he relocated to Washington, D.C. to work as a chief economist at the IBD before moving to Boston in 2000 to work at Harvard. Even as they built their life in the United States, Hosman and his family never gave up on overturning the revolution underway in his home country. His wife, Ana Julio Jotter, served as an executive committee on the executive committee supporting Maria Corina Machado at her US-funded USAID machine, Sumate, which led to the failed effort to remove Chavez during a recall vote in 2003. So it's a whole family affair. We're all in the coup machine. When the referendum delivered record turnout in support of Chavez, Hosman used his position at Harvard to defend his wife's futile effort in the Get Out to Vote USAID machine ran by Maria, issuing a paper that undermined the official vote count by marring it with accusations of fraud. He wasn't in the country. He had no idea. He just wrote a paper about it. His argument was comprehensively debunked in a Center for Economic and Policy Research study that determined Hassman and his co-author, MIT's Roberto Rigobon, ultimately provided no evidence of fraud in the entire paper. Meanwhile, the Carter Center, which monitored the vote on the ground, released its own report asserting that it did not receive or observe any evidence of fraud. For Hassman and his wife, the tireless campaign to defeat the Chavez and later Maduro agenda within Venezuela's border was a family tradition at this point. Hassman's father-in-law, Braulio Jartar Dottie, was a high-level official in Venezuela's ruling Ascensión Democrática party when it waged a violent battle against fellow citizens throughout the 1960s. According to an independent Chilean news site, Jartar Dottie was in charge of eliminating groups in the country at the time, like literally killing them. In 1963, he wrote the book on how to eradicate rebels, publishing a guide titled Disabling the quote unquote extreme left. So, as in all of the coups throughout Latin America, they use the label left for people who just want their country back. When Hassman's daughter, Joanna, pledged to provide viewers with the facts on Venezuela in her January 2019 video, she curiously omitted her family history. Her father's role in Guaido's coup government, her mother's US-backed campaign with USAID to remove Chavez from office, and her grandfather's dirty war on killing resistance fighters. Anya uncovered the saga and put it on the record in March of 2019 in a piece titled Ricardo Hassman's Morning After for Venezuela, the neoliberal brain behind Juan Guaido's economic agenda. She noted that Joanna not only neglected to disclose her family ties to the coup government, but had merely parroted her father's own pro-regime change arguments, which he outlined in his January 2008 opinion piece called D-Day Venezuela. Though much of Joanna's script tracked with her father's, the elder Hassman added an opening declaration of bloodlust for his homeland, insisting that military intervention by a coalition of regional forces was the only way to resolve the country's crisis. They love killing people. In publishing, when Anya published her expose on the entire family, I aimed to inform the public that the video racking up millions of views on social media had not been produced by a common Venezuelan, but one with a clear stake in the regime change. Yet within weeks of her article publication, Joanna was making the rounds on the internet again, this time thanks to the New York Times. On April 1st, 2019, the Times published a freshly produced Hassman tirade. This time, Joanna's tirade took aim at the U.S. left, which she complained was far too focused on what Trump is doing about Venezuela and spreading rumors that the U.S. is considering military intervention in the country, the very type of military intervention that they wanted to happen. So shut up, left. We don't want you saying that you don't want that to happen because we're actively planning it to happen. Hands off can actually mean blood on your hands, Joanna went on to say, mocking the anti-war movement, Hands Off Venezuela slogan before urging viewers to support Guaido's efforts to restore democracy. Nothing says democracy like a good old regime change. Shockingly, the New York Times failed to disclose Joanna's family links to Guaido, US-backed coup regime, triggering a flood of comments from viewers outraged that the quote-unquote paper of record frequently disregarded basic journalistic ethics. Like that would be the first time. As a quote, as a Venezuelan, I agree with everything she has to say, one comment began. That said, I think it's an ethical error of the New York Times to not disclose the fact that her father is Ricardo Hausman. The commentator, Giorgio Angelino, went on, quote, his economic policy is likely the plan that will go into place should the opposition get control of the government. To say nothing of the merits of the plan, it should be noted that her father has a lot to gain politically and professionally if there's a regime change, unquote. In response to the outcry, Times editor Adam Elnick sought a cloak of using feminism. Elnick posted a swift reply to one of the comments, confessing that though his publication was aware of her family's background, it opted not to disclose Joanna's relationship with the coup regime because she is an independent adult and a woman and who is popular and has her own following. Yet the paper's own ethic code explicitly states that the staff members must be sensitive that perfectly proper political activity by their spouses, family, and companions may nonetheless create a conflict of interest or an appearance of conflict and must be reported. As criticism of Joanna's glorified ad for the coup regime that employed her father snowballed on social media, my article documenting the Hausman's family dark history went viral. Joanna replied by blocking Anya on Twitter. She then goes on, despite having blocked her from commenting, and says, I'm proud of my dad. That was her response. Rather than respond to Anya, she leaned on her father for defense. Like Joanna's editor at the Times, Professor Hausman hid behind his daughter's gender to assert that Anya's criticisms amounted to the year's most sexist comment. That was his reply on Twitter. Anya's a woman. How is that sexist? He would go on to say that since his daughter is entitled to her own opinion, she must be speaking on behalf of some male figure that tells her what to say. Seriously? No, but I'm sure you helped draft her talking points. Meanwhile, Guaido's shadow regime was relying on the professor to craft policies that would hand Venezuela's economy over to the highest foreign bidder, which is the purpose of the coups, as we've discovered. Unfortunately for the Hausman clan, however, its patriarch's time in Venezuela's US-backed coup machine was coming to an end. In August 2019, Anya discovered a financial disclosure form that Hausman was required to file with Harvard in his capacity as a professor. The document revealed that throughout his time at the university, Hausman raked in dozens of lucrative payments from major banking institutions and global finance organizations, as well as repressive and theatrical governments in exchange for speaking engagements and consulting jobs. Between 2009 and 2019, Hausman collected fees for a total of 61 outside professional activities while employed at Harvard, including paid speaking engagements for JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Citigroup. He also was paid for speeches and consulting services in Peru, Brazil, Kazakhstan, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Additionally, Hausman participated in paid engagements with the IMF. You know, the one that likes to loan people money and take their resources in exchange. Also, the World Bank. And his future employer, under Guaido's shadow regime, the International American Development Bank. They had been paying him, and now he's going to be the fake government's representative to them. How could someone who once criticized Goldman Sachs for its decision to purchase Venezuelans' debt, an act he argued should make the investors feel morally queasy, justify collecting payments from Saudi Arabia and Israel? Was Hosman truly committed to the ideals of freedom and democracy? So he frequently complained, but about the very things that he complained about those things happening in Venezuela while he's being paid by governments that are much worse. On top of exposing his hypocrisy, Hosman's disclosure form raised ethical concerns. Listed among the corporations, governments, and international financial institutions that were paying him was a mysterious benefactor called Ricardo Hosman Consulting. Started in 2016, the firm was listed as having paid Hosman for his work as a consultant and principal investigator. Essentially, Hosman had established his own private consulting firm through which to funnel unknown payment sums from anonymous clients. Because Harvard only required him to list the consulting firm on his disclosure form, there was no record of who was paying this consulting firm for him to do work. The existence of Hosman's private consulting firm cut to the core of a scandal surrounding his work for Guaido's Coup administration. Should a government official, because he's supposedly a government official as an economic advisor to Guaido, be allowed to maintain a private consulting firm and accept payments from anonymous donors? What's more, if Hosman was indeed working for Venezuela's government on the International Development Bank, why was he still employed by Harvard? Other Guaido appointees, such as the PDVSA, that's their oil company chair, Alejandro Gristani, and OAS quote-unquote ambassador Tari, were required to quit their jobs before they were appointed to the fake government. Now, keep in mind, this government doesn't even exist. Similarly, Samantha Powers was required to take public service leave from Harvard while she fulfilled her duties at the Coup machine USAID. Why didn't Harvard apply those same standards to Hosman? Or his underling at Harvard, Guaido's attorney general, fake one, Jose Ignacio Hernandez. Anya contacted Harvard with these obvious ethical questions, inquiring whether it was typical to have active government officials on their faculty. She also pressed Harvard to follow through on its commitment to transparency and require Hosman to name the clients of his private consulting firm. Though the government failed to respond, Anya eventually received a much more consequential reply from the man at the center of the controversy. On a late afternoon in August of 2019, Anya obtained Hosman's personal cell number and fired off a series of questions via WhatsApp. I can't think of one example of someone who worked an academic job while serving in government. How do you have time to do both jobs? She asked him. Hosman's WhatsApp status indicated he was online, and he immediately replied, I exercise no government function. I do not run an organization. I am not paid by the Venezuelan government, and I do not manage a public budget. What? In those two sentences, the professor irreparably undermined the Washington's Venezuela policy and his own credibility. Though Hosman claimed to exercise no government function, Guaido had tapped him to represent Venezuela's fake regime at the IDB 5 months prior. In addition to that role, Hosman was overseeing Guaido's $150 billion debt restructuring plan in his capacity as an official presidential advisor. Because remember, the OAS recognized the fake officials as being the real officials. And they're now occupying the Venezuelan embassy with a fake government, and international bodies are now dealing with all of these fake people, to include the $150 billion debt restructuring plan, even though they don't have anything to do with Venezuela and they're not even in Venezuela. If these activities do not constitute government functions, then Hausman was admitting that what many of the critics in Washington already knew. It was fake. The entire thing was fake, but they were allowing them to conduct official duties. So she fires back. Are you telling me that Guaido's administration does not constitute a legitimate government? I am sure the Venezuelan people will be surprised to hear you admit it. Realizing he had screwed up big time, he says, I'm an advisor of Juan Guaido's, which I do on a pro bono basis. Yeah, you can't do that at the International Development Bank. That doesn't cut it. I have been named governor of the IDB and a member of the restructuring committee, neither of which is compensated. So, you do exercise government functions, Anya replied, highlighting that both Gurisani and Tari were required to quit their jobs before joining Venezuela's fake government, regardless of whether they were getting paid. She goes on to say, this isn't an issue of compensation. At this point, Hausman's defense dissolved from logic to babble. He responds, you are not a journalist, nor are you interested in the truth. You are an advocate for a cause, and you produce biased and untrue stuff that advances your political agenda. Anya replies, okay, you're entitled to your opinion. Have I said anything false? The professor responds, I'm not required to quit my job according to Venezuela law, US law, or Harvard norms. Anya replies, okay, but shouldn't you disclose your private consulting clients if you're a government advisor? Rather than answer that question, Hausman changed the subject. You tried to disqualify my daughter just because she is my daughter, as opposed to an independent woman. Was anything I said false? Did she learn failure to disclose from you? Once again, he says, please disclose how, he said, please disclose how much money you have received from Maduro. What have you been doing with the dictatorship? She noticed that as of Friday afternoon turned to evening, the Harvard professor started making all kinds of spelling errors, and his responses was deteriorating as far as coherency. So he may have been at a happy hour somewhere. The coup officials' desperate devolution into accusations that Venezuelan government funded my work suggested that he had finally realized the grave error he made in engaging her. While she openly worked as a correspondent and host for RT America between the years 2014 and 19, since then, she had never accepted payment from a state or a state-funded institution. Unlike Hausman, the gray zone where she worked had never received funding or support from any government. Anya then hits with, so how much did the Wahhabi kingdom pay you again? It was then that the academic and former Venezuelan government official melted down and told her to go to hell. Considering his professional rank in the quote-unquote government, I was astonished by his behavior and his tantrum. Our exchange, which began at roughly 2 in the afternoon, went on for over 12 hours. Throughout the evening, he descended deeper and deeper into absurdities, at one point, even requesting that I disclose my father's identity. I proudly informed the professor that, unlike him, my father spent his free time cooking Indian food and relaxing, not orchestrating government overthrows. At precisely 3:31 a.m., Hossman launched his final WhatsApp barrage demanding to see one article in which I questioned or criticized any of the Maduro's crimes and errors. I told him that I would leave that job to Western journalists. The professor's manifesto stopped. At around 4 in the morning, Hossman had blocked her number and prevented himself from issuing any further responses. His self-restraint had arrived a little too late. On September 6th, I published the contents of the revealing WhatsApp exchange at Gray Zone, including screenshots. 11 days later, Ricardo Hossman resigned from the fake government. Unfortunately, despite the honor and trust that this offer signified to Anna, she could not accept it at the moment due to the incompatibility. Oh, this is what he said. Unfortunately, despite the honor and trust of this offer, I could not accept it at the moment due to excuse me, the incompatibility with my current obligations to Harvard University. So in other words, he wasn't supposed to be doing what he was doing. As was customary with documents issued by the Guaido fake regime, Hossman's letter contained a critical error. When he posted a screenshot of his resignation letter, Hossman accidentally included the letter's recipient. Yet the name located in the top left corner was not Juan Guaido. I'm sorry, but wasn't it Juan Guaido that appointed him? And isn't Juan Guaido the president that he was supposed to be advising him? He addressed it to Leopoldo Lopez. Yeah. What? So, what? Hossman revealed the true leader of the Venezuelan coup regime was not Guaido at all, but Leopoldo Lopez, the co-founder of the US-backed Validad Popular Party. Atop the injury that Hossman's departure exacted on the fake regime, the professor had made a critical error. So basically, he was hired by an opposition political party to pretend like he was running the government as an economic part of the government and serving in post for a political party still residing in Venezuela. It would be like somebody like the DNC appointing an economic advisor and then appointing that economic advisor to go represent the US abroad, doing shit that affected our economy. And they would have no authority to do that. But then all of these other governments that don't like the United States goes, yeah, we'll recognize him and let him screw America. That's exactly what just happened. So that's crazy shit. All right. Something happened to SR71. Let me get him back up here. So that was very enlightening. Bridget, are you available to talk or are you busy? She is hosting friends for the weekend to go hunting deer over the weekend. So she probably will not be chit-chatting with us today, but I thank her for being here, hanging out and listening. Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel. I was just doing some read up on Guaido's fake government and what was going on there. And you take a look at how everything was set up and what they did, and the nations that accepted him as a legitimate leader versus the nations that did not. And of course, him stepping on their own selves, so to speak, by saying, yeah, we are, and no, we are, and this, that, and the other. It is evident when you see it that, oh my Lord.
Name off some of the...
we just do this everywhere else?
Name off some of the countries that accepted him after the U.S. Did that.
Some of the countries that accepted him, well, I can tell you ones that rejected it real quick, which were Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran.
Because they're all trading with
US
Venezuela.
Accepted them. Who else we got in here? The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, most members of the European Union, the Organization of American States. All of these viewed Guaido as legitimate.
All of the NATO, basically, is what you're saying, and the OAS under the control of the United States.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what happens when you have imperialistic powers of control over other countries. And they orchestrate that control through USAID and our foreign aid programs.
I got to give it to the lady that brought all this forward and put everything out there for everybody to see.
She's a hot pocket, isn't she?
I mean, she was the one that literally took this government down. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, she's a hot pocket. I love it. I did reach out to her, by the way. I'd love to interview her for you guys at the end of the book, but I've not heard a response from her. Yeah, she definitely is a hot pocket. I love it. Very feisty and obviously a very good researcher, digging up all of the loose ends that have to be dug up in order to expose these operations. So my hat's off to her, and the reason why I wanted to share the book with you guys, because it does give us an inside view of the machine. And literally how compromised most of the actors in these regime changes really are. You know, we've looked at it kind of from the outside, looking through some of the generals and the School of America graduates, and, you know, kind of the grooming process that the CIA went through in order to put these people as military dictators all over the world. But she obviously has their number and knows exactly where to dig. And I just can't imagine doing the research and coming up with one gold mine after another gold mine after another gold mine of tying all these pieces together. And we really haven't even got to, I mean, this was a critical chapter in the story, but there's a few other, we're going to talk about Lopez in a little bit more detail. But there's a few more shocking things that happen that is allowed to happen to Venezuela, that is just outright theft of their resources. That to me was just shocking. But I'm going to wait to cover those, because you have to actually have the details to understand just how deep this effort went. And to me, I came away from it as the entire recognition of the fake government was a way for grand theft at a magnitude that's dumbfounding. because again, it would be like allowing an opposition political party in America to act on an international stage as a representative because another country recognized them as a fake government of the United States. And you know that would never be tolerated by the United States, and yet it was us doing it to another country. But we haven't even got to the worst part of it yet. But we will. So, if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to go back to reading. I think I'm on 750 of like 1,000-page book. But once I get done with that book, we will not do that book as a review. It would take us half a year. But I am going to write some long threads that kind of capture what it is, because it's about an organization we've never even come across. And I think you guys are going to find it fascinating because it not only touches the Colombian drug trade, the Mexican drug trade, it goes back and talks about Chiang Kai-shek and his relationship with the CIA. It's really an interesting book that talks about a lot of the threads that we've pulled. And it's an organization that was working behind the scenes that I'd never come across. So I can't wait to share all that with you guys. But I got to know how the story ends. SR71, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everybody for here on X and on Rumble. You make this all possible. Anyway, the other thing that I was looking at is Guaido went into exile in 2023. And you want to know where he's currently at?
Go ahead and tell everybody. I know where he's at.
Miami, Florida. That's where he's at. And at some given point, I expect to hear Guaido's name again. We'll change his name somehow, give him an alias, and stick him in a place where they really want him.
Potentially, but that's where a lot of the Venezuelan expats are. And that's why I find it very nefarious that when I discovered that the Smartmatic machines that everybody keeps telling you was created in Venezuela was never created in Venezuela. It was created by expats like these guys were talking about in these books that are criminals in Southern Florida, 3 of them. So just another tidbit feather to stick in your hat about people lying to us about just about everything. So, all right. With that, we're going to call it a day. Thank you guys for being here. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And I will see you back on Monday at 4:00. Take care. Okay, guys. Have a nice evening. Have a nice weekend. I'm going to try to go to a car show tomorrow with my husband. And have fun and see my grandbaby. Take care, Shelly from New Zealand. Love you guys.